Welcome to Directly Correct, a People Links podcast with Cole and Scott. Today's guest, Jackson Roatch.
Thanks to our sponsors, Orgnostic. Fast track the insights behind your people data using Orgnostic by connecting all your HR data in one people analytics platform. Quickly uncover the insights you need to measure the success of your people initiatives. Orgnostic is the most innovative people analytics, generative AI, data orchestration, and employee listening tool on the market. To learn more, book a demo at orgnostic.com/directionally correct. And then you put somebody's stapler in Jell-O,
Never did that.
Yeah, the Dwight Schrute,
Yeah, exactly.
the gym pranks.
Well, Jackson, man, thanks for joining us today. You've been really, I feel like, at least from my perspective, on a writing spree, getting your stuff out there. So well done. What's motivated you to kind of get your name out there?
Yeah, I mean, to be honest with you, I've always really liked writing. I've followed a lot of writers on Substack, including yourself. And it really just started out as a New Year's resolution of, hey, it'd be cool to, I have all these thoughts, they go nowhere, or they end up as, lectures that I give to people without their consent. So, actually, putting it out there in a structured kind of format, and I just really wanted to see where it would go, and it's gotten some positive reception. So started to have some momentum, and to be honest with you, I just enjoy writing for the sake of it. I feel like it helps me learn things because I may have some vague idea that is kind of bouncing around in my head, but I don't have a lot of structure to it, or I haven't really fully like tested it out or tried to falsify it or red team the idea, and the writing process kind of helps me with that process and potentially get to a totally different conclusion just through that. So it's just a fun thing to do.
Yeah, the great thing is, like, not many people are doing it. So even if you publish a few articles, you put your name out there, far more than you're like in the top 5% automatically.
Exactly. Yeah, I think a lot of people are nervous, and it's understandably so. Like, just broadcasting your deepest thoughts about what you're supposed to be an expert in is really putting yourself on the line. But I love the point that you make, that like just by doing that gets you more readership or more influence than almost everyone else.
Yeah. Well, like, why did this kind of thing emerge, do you think? Like there's people out there, they're writing, they're kind of filling a gap. What was that part of your motivation to do that?
I think that's part of it. I think in our field of IO psychology or people analytics, there's a little bit of a missing middle in terms of, we have folks that are doing great research and they're scientists, and a lot of their work is locked behind paywalls and doesn't have a lot of good like publicity, other than some Adam Grant books here and there, and some other TED Talks here and there. And then you have practitioners who, a lot of their work is proprietary, so they can't necessarily share like the cool analysis that they did at their company. So there's this gap in the middle where there's space for, like, the good ideas are there. It's just a matter of making them available to a broader audience.
There's so much content too. Like, no one as a practitioner really has time to review articles the way an academic does, right? It's just inundated month after month, and like you really need some sort of like aggregation engine to, distill the information to something usable. Forget all the stuff that's just like not usable at all. And I guess you become that aggregation engine by doing this.
Yeah, and just playing that translator role. Which obviously you guys do here with the podcast and the Substack newsletter as well. But I think there's probably a shortage of translators. So it's cool to participate in that, and hopefully more people will jump on board and start to connect some of these gaps. You
got any articles you want to pimp? Like, you got some things you're really proud of?
Yeah, I just wrote an article about the Lindy effect in people analytics and the relationship between worker tenure and turnover. That was a fun one where I talked about how there's this statistical phenomenon called the Lindy effect, which was actually coined in New York City Broadway in the 50s, where these comedians were like speculating about it. They said, it seems like the lifespan of a comedian is inherently proportional to the amount of exposure they've had to that medium. And it turns out that this effect is actually a statistical phenomenon that you see across fields. Everywhere you see this notion of things that have been around for a while are going to stay around in the future. And I had some experience working with the variables tenure and worker turnover, and there always seemed to be a consistent pattern, at different organizations or in different departments within an organization. So to be able to draw from some of the research to say, like, there's actually some theory behind this phenomenon, kind of like we would have theory behind employee attitudes. Just a fun topic.
Yeah, I mean, well, let's dig into this a little further. I mean, I think this is one of the reasons why there's so many people start a podcast and then 2 episodes in, they quit doing the podcast. I feel like that's the Lindy effect, like the opposite side of
Yep.
it. The things that aren't going to stick around don't stick
Right.
around either.
Yeah.
But let me give you a quick introduction, Jackson. I think I forgot, I glossed over that. So Jackson Roatch is the head of people analytics at WEX, self-described armchair economist turned professional IO psychologist. Like we mentioned, writes for Substack, focuses on people analytics, organizational psychology, and then some of the stuff that's going on with AI and machine learning. And in Jackson, we actually wrote an article together about elephant hunting and using algorithmic decision making in people analytics. What was kind of the thought process there? Because that was definitely more your idea than mine behind this, and I mean, this seems really relevant to a lot of the discussion that's going on right now about decision making using AI. Do you want to talk about that at all?
Yeah, absolutely. Obviously, we're at this inflection point with AI where we're starting to have to wrangle with how do we use it in high stakes scenarios like personnel selection, and how do we do this fairly. And people that are focused on ethical and responsible AI in our field are worried about AI potentially scaling bias, right? So the idea that you can screen thousands of resumes.
Well, can I ask about that? What
Yeah,
is bias? Like, I hear this all the time. What is it, and why is it important for us to care?
yeah, great question. I would look at bias as there are kind of two types of measurement error. Say if you wanted to measure a group of people's job performance, right? You can have random error and you can have systematic error. Random error is just noise. It's like, hey, our measurement instrument isn't perfect. Sometimes just by chance we overestimate or we undershoot. Systematic error is also known as bias, and really what people are talking about in this scenario is systematic error related to a protected demographic, whether that's age or sex or ethnicity. So if we are consistently overshooting or undershooting on our measurement of somebody because of one of those protected classes, then obviously that is a bias that is arising from a machine learning model or an algorithm that we would want to prevent.
This is the portion of the podcast where Cole puts you through comps review.
Oh
Right.
yeah. It's just like we use these terms like really kind of cavalierly. And it's like, well, what do we mean? I don't know. I apologize, Jackson. Keep
No.
going.
It,
Tell
it
us,
it's
tell us
it,
more about algorithmic decision
Well, I
making.
mean, we do talk about these sort of things without really discussing the underlying aspects of them, right? Like bias is inherent to pretty much everything we do. We just need to account for it as best we can, right? And on the other hand, you want to discriminate. You want to discriminate the things you're looking for versus things you're not looking for.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's great to define our terms, but really the key insight of our article, Cole, I think was that there's a possibility of scaling bias through AI. That's a very real and
Yes.
legitimate concern. But the question is, at any given time, compared to what, right? So our kind of key insight was that you know there's this thing called the unstructured job interview, and it happens to be the social norm for how people are selected everywhere at scale in mass today, and that is very biased by its nature, because people are biased, right? The best looking, tallest, most confident and charismatic people get selected for jobs all the time because of human bias. And one of the key issues with that is that we don't have any visibility into that because there's no data, right? By virtue of it being unstructured, nobody's sitting there with a form saying this is how I'm rating Jackson on this interview. There's no data, so we couldn't even look for bias if we were concerned about it. Compared to AI and machine learning, is there may be bias in the models, but these problems are tractable because we have the data, we have mechanisms for evaluating, and this is a really kind of burgeoning field within IO right now. Is how do we audit these models? Um, so yeah, it just comes back to the core question of compared to what? What's the counterfactual?
Mm-hmm. This is how to measure anything aspects of like, yes, your model may not be that great, but it's better than what, random chance. That's always the baseline you got to compare everything to.
Yeah, exactly. Or we only explain 12% of the variance. Dang,
Yeah.
isn't that isn't that cruddy?
That's better than nothing. Yeah.
Yeah.
But there's absolutely room for improvement too. Well, Jackson, I know you actually had a bunch of stuff you wanted to talk to us about today. Anything you wanted to bring up?
Well, I think on the topic of writing in Substack, I think we'd be remiss to not talk about how we're seeing more and more folks sign up to write Substacks or blogs about people analytics and IO. I think is really cool. So I'd be interested in your thoughts on like are we seeing the emergence of a blogosphere in the field of people analytics or IO psychology? Where does this go, or how do we get writers connected to each other, things like that?
I think they should all stop writing. Like just quit it. There's not enough to go around for all of us. You got to stop. Yeah.
I mean, like Cole, like what's the community like? You publish something, it feels like weekly or bi-weekly anyway. Like, is there a
Yeah.
community around there?
I don't know. I'm not good. Like, I feel like Jackson, you're more integrated in like what's going on in like Substack. I just kind of post and let it go out and do its thing. And I do a lot of stuff on LinkedIn, but I wouldn't say like I'm a member of a community per se in any way. I don't know. Do you feel a part of a community?
I guess what I'm asking is like, are we in the midst of the creation of one? Um, and,
Maybe.
and 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 part of how I think about this goes back to I'm like a blog nerd who followed a lot of the blogs coming out of like the mid and late 2000s, where you had these folks in what is now called the rationalist community. But I'm not sure if you guys are familiar with this, but basically a bunch of nerds from kind of Silicon Valley and the San Francisco area started creating blobs and talking about weird like kind of niche things like effective
Yeah.
altruism, which is the
Oh
crazy
yeah.
idea
Like
that like, hey,
Sam
our charity should
Bankman-Fried,
be.
right? Like that. Those good people.
Yeah, yeah, those good people. And so now, yeah, of course, now there's this weird controversy, related to that. But some cool things have come out of that community too, like the whole uh, the whole AI alignment field wouldn't even be a thing if it weren't for that community.
What does that mean?
Yeah.
So AI alignment is the term for the risk of extinction, human extinction arising from AI. So it's this field of like existential risk that basically says, how do we control AI and align it with human interests so that we don't get this exponential like super intelligence that one day takes over and then all of a sudden like we're all dead.
Is it even possible to like stop progress? I mean, like this is what Musk and like other folks have. They signed some sort of treaty or something like that, some pact. Where it's like, I don't know, man. The genie's out of the bottle. Like, I don't know if we're gonna do here.
Yeah. Could we even stop it at this point?
Well, where does Gen AI like? What are the best benefits for a people analytics organization? Like you kind of talked about selection, and it could introduce bias there, but there's got to be like other areas that it can influence, right? What do you two see as the biggest impact for Gen AI?
I mean, the way I kind of look at it is there's this, the tricky part of it is this, some of the generative AI stuff is really promising. What makes people feel uncomfortable is if it does one of two things. If it's going to replace a human, the human who's in that role is like, I'm not crazy about this, right? Or if it's going to replace something you enjoy doing, right? Like if it's something you really like doing, it's like, well, I don't want to do that. So the kind of the conclusion I've come to is it's hopefully just going to be really good for automating things that no one wants to do, right? That to me seems to be the most killer of use cases. Whereas like when you do get into the algorithmic decision making component, you have to walk on much finer eggshells to do this appropriately. But if you're just getting rid of work that no one ever wanted to do in the first place, and it's like, okay, now it's automated, I think we can all collectively clap about that.
Sheer time savings play.
Yeah. And that's the productivity. Everybody said,
Yeah.
generative AI is going to bring about productivity improvements. Well, that's it. That's the productivity improvements.
It leads to faster decision making too, right? Like if you can automate that, you can make decisions at speed, which just speeds everything up. And I guess you need more AI to handle that too. At some point, like there was like approaching singularity, no matter what.
I mean, are we? I don't feel like it. Sometimes I feel like it. Today's not one of those days where I'm like, oh yeah, we're just on the verge of AI super intelligence, and like it just doesn't feel like it at this moment in time.
Well, yeah, I think everything's relative too, right? To your point, like I famously talked about this. I had an old mentor boss, however you want to talk about it. He was conducting psychometric analysis in the 1930s and 40s, and he would run correlations by hand. Write it all out, calculate it all out, and then when he was done, they had fairly small sample sizes, but a lot of items, whatever. He'd have to do it again. So it'd take another week or two to calculate this all out, just in case he made a mistake. Now you just hit a button on SPSS or your platform of choice is done. But to your point, that time gets filled. It's like a vacuum. And however long the meeting lasts, that's how long that your work's going to fill your work.
It's the Lindy effect of meetings, man. Like that's what it is.
There you go. Well, and interestingly, that didn't put statisticians out of a job, right?
No.
Like that's kind of a key insight is that the demand for statistician work is so great that that just frees people that are stats experts to work on more questions or better questions. And I think we'll probably see something similar with generative AI. I think first of all, like we're super early days.
Yes.
Andrew Ng, who's a professor of AI at Stanford, just gave a talk on like what is the state of AI in 2023, and he talked about how the vast majority of use cases are still around supervised learning, which is just like labeling things. This employee's high flight risk or low flight risk. Generative AI may start to kind of encroach on that market share of AI use cases, but we still really don't know, and we're still very far away from anything resembling super intelligence.
I think the benefit of a computer, Gen AI, is that it has perfect memory. You can input just a ton of things into it, and say like strategic planning for managers. All of a sudden, a manager can know what every other department's doing, and AI can cascade goals down to the teammates, and you could have essentially aligned strategy, and then humans come in and mess it up with their foibles, their bias, this sort of thing.
Bias.
Yeah. But I mean, I think that's the time savings. Like what used to take you several weeks and meeting after meeting after meeting. Oh, well, just like we have all the information in the system, it'll spit out a plan. But once again, it could lead you down the wrong path, not the path you want to take.
Well, I have an analogy I want to try out with you guys. I said this to somebody earlier today about what I think is going on with AI, and it's kind of related to like what's going on in people analytics. There's people analytics where we do like research, right? So we go deep on one topic, and maybe you build a PowerPoint at the end of it and you present it out, and hopefully they take action on it. But sometimes if something is like really substantive and we want to make sure it's repeated over and over again, we pivot from doing research into building products, right? Like or putting
Building.
models into production rather
Yeah.
than just being a one-time model that we see here. The thing I see with AI is if you replace the word research with novelty, I see a lot of what it's going on is like just making more novelty. So at first it started out with just, text, and then it became text and images, and now it's text and images and voices. But it's just adding more novelty to it. I'm not seeing a whole lot of what I would call models in production, like things that are going out there that are actually helping people all the time that aren't just novelty seeking. I don't know, do you guys agree with that?
I would agree with you with the stipulation that I want to see what's going to happen when all of these tools are instantiated in the Office products and Google's equivalent. Because it seems like we're still in the early days of
Yeah,
that
like,
being
why
rolled
isn't
out.
that already out there? Like, they announced
That's a
that
great
stuff like
question.
a year ago, it feels like, and it's
Yeah.
like, why is it not everywhere? And to me, that tells us like, okay, novelty is at a premium, but real use cases are much harder than they're letting on, which makes me believe that like we're way far away from the singularity.
I don't think that. Yes, we don't see a whole lot of forward-facing tools, right? We don't have a whole lot to our fingertips, but I think that they're out there. Like, there's a lot of AI being conducted behind the scenes, even simplistic AI. If then sort of statements, etc. But that is like a form of AI. I just don't think that we have the sight lines into it. But to your point, I think that it will be made apparent in the next 2 years.
Question for you guys: do you think we have the use cases? Because like it seems like to me you can treat machine learning as a hammer and try to go find the nails, and that doesn't work really well. But the biggest AI powered companies have said kind of we have a very specific issue, like I need to find a ride share with Uber, or how do I find a potential date with Tinder? Like, do we need to step up to the plate in people analytics and say here are the specific valuable use cases for AI and work at it that way?
I'll be your matchmaker, Jackson. I mean, if that's what you're looking for, man, we can make this happen.
I have an algorithm for that. I don't need your bias, Cole.
Plus, Jake's got a guitar, man. He's a picker. He's good. He's talented.
Also true. I also have a girlfriend, so
Oh yeah.
Womp womp.
Well, I mean, like we've had say like people on like scorecards for a long time, like weighted sort of fields, this sort of thing, which leads to the best overall decision. That in a form is AI. You have to input your own numbers, this sort of thing. It's just not formalized and automated.
not
Yeah.
productized.
I don't know, man. Well, like, I mean, I feel like this conversation could go anywhere, Jackson, but I mean, you are you an economist by training? Like, did you study that before now? Because I think about like what's going on in the macroeconomic environment, interest rates, like all this kind of stuff. Like, what do you see happening in the broader world?
Yeah, so I got my bachelor's degree in economics. So I kind of pivoted from economics to IO and grad school. So not an economist by training necessarily, but I know enough to be dangerous. I really find the economics kind of conceptual toolkit to be extremely valuable.
How so?
Concepts. Well, we've referenced some of these already in our conversation. Counterfactual thinking, saying like
Mhm.
compared to what. The notion of opportunity cost is closely related to that, obviously, and
Mhm.
then you have things like transaction costs, which are a super relevant concept. Cole, you've talked about how the role of people analytics is to lower costs. We're not a revenue center. We have to justify our existence. And a lot of
Don't be quoting me to me. I'm going to forget what I said.
I think you said that in my words. But the idea that there are kind of these like costs that are real economic factors, but that maybe don't show up on the balance sheet. Things like it takes a lot of time to search and find people, or to coordinate, or to enforce contracts. A lot of these concepts are really relevant to people analytics, and just help if you're a leader trying to figure out what's important in your company and people analytics. I think a little bit of economic literacy goes a long way. Cole, to your question, like what's going on in the macroeconomic environment, I don't think there's like one single way of just saying like, oh, because we're in a hiking rates or high interest rate environment, like here's what we should do in people analytics. But I do think if you look at the macro environment and then you look at your organization or the organization you're consulting with, and you say, what is their situation in relation to the macroeconomic environment, it can be super powerful in terms of helping you understand the sort of insights that are going to be valuable to that organization. There are boom companies and bust cycles, and there are bust companies and boom cycles. But once you understand the situation, then you start to understand, okay, some analytics around finding talent would be really helpful to this company because we're trying to grow as fast as we can, and talent acquisition is the limiting factor, right? Or maybe like we need to get more efficient because credit is getting more expensive. So let's look at spans and layers or revenue per FTE, and those sort of insights might be more valuable in that context.
Will there be peace in the Middle East? I mean, if we're talking like global.
Let's wade into it, man.
Final. I was waiting for you to ask that question, Scott.
Yeah, anyway.
Y'all want to move on? You want to do some confusion matrix?
The confusion matrix. Yeah, let's do some confusion matrix.
All right. Let's do some Waffle House. We haven't done Waffle House in a long time.
Yeah, man.
Jake,
hey, by the way, so I was in Denver earlier this week, and I saw a guy wearing a Waffle House hoodie, and I was like, oh, I wonder if he listens to the podcast. Like, that was like legitimately my first reaction. And then I realized, oh, wait, we're not the center of the universe. That people wearing Waffle House hoodies has nothing to do with us.
Well, I mean, like, Jake, did you know that Cole managed a Waffle House?
No kidding.
I was a waiter there for like 3 months. I did not manage it.
I feel like wearing a Waffle House shirt is just asking for a fight on the street. Like,
it's a strong statement, right?
I wanted to know where he bought it from.
Can you buy a Waffle House shirt? Just go to Waffle House and be like, give me a shirt.
No, it was a hood. Like, it was like a hoodie. Like, it wasn't like a uniform that someone would wear at Waffle House. It was like a fashion, like something that you bought at Urban Outfitters or something. I don't know.
Wow. Okay. No, that's definitely a choice if you go to Urban Outfitters.
Anyway, sorry I interrupted you, Scott. What's going on with the Waffle House?
Okay, this is a write-in. We actually have an official write-in from someone else that was interested in this question. So, I mean, and by the way, if anyone has any other write-in suggestions, text Cole, because it's questionable whether I will ever respond.
Yeah, don't text me. We don't want them. We're just going to come up with our own.
Definitely text Cole. Okay, Jake, would you rather survive a tornado or a tsunami? And I was told it was the whole experience, from like seeing it come in to the aftermath.
Oh, well, I'd probably have to pick tornado. I'm from Kansas City, so have had, a few close calls with tornadoes before, and it's really not as scary as other people think.
You're taunting the tornadoes.
We're talking relative here, right? But just get in the basement, take shelter. It'll roll over you. May destroy your house or something, but if you get low, then you should be okay.
At least tornado, like it feels like there's like warning, right? Like you hear the sirens go off. Like in Louisiana, it's like every week there's sirens going off, right? And you just go outside and stare at the sky. Don't really actually do anything.
Most of the time, like I'm talking broad strokes here. It can be scary when there's low visibility, and sometimes like with the Joplin tornado disaster, like
Mhm.
the weather people there didn't even catch it until there was this F5 mile wide tornado like going over people's houses. So um, can be pretty terrible that way.
Yeah, I mean, tornadoes actually have much stronger wind than a hurricane, though. So, like, my answer would be like, is if as long as I'm above sea level, like a hurricane, if you're below sea level, you're in a bad way. But if you're above sea level, I think hurricane every time over direct hit by a tornado, I mean, that's pretty bad, you know? I don't know.
Oh, well, tsunami was the other end of that spectrum. But
Oh, I thought it
yeah,
was hurricane.
did I say hurricane? Well, okay. Option 3 then.
Not a good listener.
What's your favorite natural disaster? Great question.
I'm partial to forest fires, right?
There you
Why
go.
not?
Yeah. Controlled burn.
Controlled burn.
Tsunami's pretty bad.
Yeah, tsunami's like wild because like the ocean will like go out and people that's where a lot of people like die. Is like, why is the ocean 300 yards out further than it normally is without knowing that here comes a wave a mile long. It's
Yeah.
coming right at them.
Now,
When
in
you
terms of like
consider,
what's cooler to watch, like if you could get to like a
Yeah,
high vantage point that you feel safe, a tsunami would be phenomenal to watch.
that is
Like,
good watching.
yeah,
Weather Channel stuff, like people from like the 8th floor of their hotel,
yeah, I can't imagine what it's like to see 100-foot wave.
right?
are
Tornadoes
those
are
even
cool.
real? Like, I feel like this is like bass fishing, where people are like, oh yeah, I caught 20 pound. Yeah, it's like, no, you didn't. Like it was 30 feet tops. It's like, oh, but it was 100 feet. You know?
It's also the length of it too. It's not just like the height.
Yeah.
It's that it just keeps coming and it
I
keeps
feel like
coming.
we're getting into a different discussion here, but let's keep going.
All right, everyone text Cole. I think that's the point of everything here.
This is wow. We're doing great.
Let's move on. I think this we'll call this failed.
All right. You want to do some nerdery? The nerdery.
Let's do it. Let's do it. I think you should kick off because I think it sets up other ones nicely.
All right. I will do that. So the first article we have today is from friend of the podcast, previous guest, Rob Cross, and then some of his co-collaborators like Karen Dillon and Martin Reeves about what's fueling burnout in your organization. This is a new HBR article that came out not too long ago. And I think they go through some of like the usual suspects and especially some of the stuff that's included in Rob and Karen's new book. I'm sorry, the name's escaping me, but we've talked about it before on the podcast.
Microstress.
Yeah. But one of the things that I thought was interesting that they put in here is burnout can also be fueled by things like collaborative overload and by like having to go up and down unnecessary layers in an organization. And one of the things that they mentioned is like a lot of the work that's going on with spans and layers right now in organizations, although I think a lot of it is just because organizations are looking to cut costs. What it can do is it can decrease collaborative overload and increase your autonomy to make decisions because you can get to decision makers without going through 4 or 5 layers of people much more quickly. And that can decrease the burnout of people in organizations. I'd never thought about that before. And I thought that was very, very clever. I don't know. Did you have any reactions to this, Scott or Jackson?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, like you refer to the like structural complexity of organizations.
Mhm.
Like, just think about how many teams an average person's on. Like, I don't know. I'm probably on 6, 8 teams right now. Like, you have these
Yeah.
sort of like different relationships you need to manage, and like different priorities, and like different information coming at you. So I mean, it all adds to your overall sense of stress. Not only just that, but managing different sort of personalities, this sort of thing. But to your point, also, like if you need to get to the your skip level, I mean, in certain hierarchical organizations, that can be a real pain.
Yeah, it's like how many people do you have to convince to make one simple decision? Right? And I imagine the lower that number is, the more, the higher your
yeah.
satisfaction is.
I think this matters even more for star employees or high potentials, however you want to define that. That would be my hypothesis, is that the flatter the organization, and the less layers, the
Yeah.
more hypos will thrive, because they have less potential collaborative overload from having to go through all these barriers. But I do wonder, for your kind of average performer who gets less one-on-one attention from their manager, like, could that actually be a detriment?
I mean, absolutely. And to your point, a flat organization is going to be easier to influence just because you can get to people more easily. I think that one of the interesting points they brought up here is organizations have ways to introduce complexity into the structure, which what we recently reviewed an article essentially said, complex organizations, they protect themselves from threats by introducing complexity, but there's no real way to remove it. Once it's there, it's there.
That's actually, it's kind of related to, I was thinking about this after I read the article. Like, imagine, like, think about, there's a really big company. Let's say you have 100,000 employees. What do you think from if you're really trying to reduce complexity, what's like the minimum number of layers you could have if you had 100,000 employees? Right? I mean, like, the CEO can't have
It can't be one
1,000
layer.
direct reports,
Yeah.
you know? And so at a certain point, if you get to a certain size, there's going to be complexity baked in, even if you don't have a matrixed organization or anything like that. But like, I mean, I'm sure there's like a math problem of like what they say the ideal number of direct reports is like 7 for every person. So if you did 7 times 7 times 7 all the way down, like how many times would you have to multiply 7 to get to 100,000 people? But I don't know. Like, what do you think? I mean, do you have any thoughts about this?
Yeah, I mean, like you'd have to turn to like a network-based structure, like the way Wikipedia is organized, or
How is Wikipedia organized? I don't
it's
even
just
know.
it's the collection of people doing their own things, but loosely connected to one another. Therefore, you don't really have a hierarchy. It's not really. It is an
Yeah.
organization, but it's not a hierarchy. But I mean, that introduces its own issues in itself, right? Coordination tax.
Is that sort of like the holacracy thing from a few years ago, or
I
are we
have
just
no
talking about a
idea.
fundamentally different structure where you're just a completely decentralized organization?
Totally decentralized. Like you'll talk about the military, talk about like terrorist organizations like this. They do that so that they can be like amoeba like and
Mm.
conform to their environment and this sort of thing. But once again, you can't have a large Fortune 500 organization operating like that. But that is a way to get to it.
Yeah.
I wonder if another way to get to it is just parent companies, right? Like often you'll have large companies where, like, the CEO will report to the CEO, right? If it's like the CEO of Blizzard
Hmm.
reports to the CEO of Microsoft, and then you basically like get a free layer in terms of like the coordination. So I wonder if that, like, in
Jackson, there's no such thing as a free lunch. An economist should know
oh,
this.
that's true. That's true. That's true.
One thing that like really resonated with me in this article is like they talk about people that write emails that are way too fucking long,
Oh
and it's
God, yeah.
like the 10th paragraph finally has the information that you're looking for, and like even then it's like kind of clouded.
Well, and
Which
have you guys seen this stuff? Like, and I don't know why some people think this is like a good thing, but you get like the AIs that help you with writing emails and then the
yes,
AIs that help you with reading emails. And it's like, who thought it was a good idea to get an AI to take your short email and make it longer so it has more flowery language? And then you need another AI to decompose the flowery language to tell you what the email actually said to make it shorter. It's like, why don't we just write short emails? How about that?
I'm a 3 sentence max guy. Like if it's 4, if it's a stretch, 4 if I need it, but 3 sentences, preferably 2.
I've always found it funny how, like, if you have a lot of power distance from somebody, like, they will probably just respond to you with like the most brief kind of like
Oh
don't
yes.
don't give a shit sort of response, like they might not even have a signature, just like, please fix this, right, is the classic one.
The
um
biggest power move I saw was wrote the email in the subject line. No
Yeah,
content, just like, "Hey, do this."
this is great. Well, What do you have for us next, Scott?
All right. So Microsoft finds that in-person settings should be reserved for moments that matter. So their data essentially says that people still find in-person meeting valuable, but of course, people like the flexibility of working from home, this sort of thing. So Microsoft has provided guidance to managers, suggesting to empower employees, leaders, managers, etc., to find time to meet in moments that matter, namely prioritize onboarding experiences, team building, and launching new products, which seems like a balanced approach to approach this sort of thing. And wow, it's like someone thought of this 2 years ago when we published an article about it.
No kidding, right?
I must have read your article.
Possibly.
Well,
I think it's a
Scott,
great.
I'm curious. I want to pick on this for just a second. If you have an existing team, so again, no new people that are onboarding,
Yeah.
and they're highly functional already, so they don't need team building, and they're not launching a new product, they have existing products. Should they ever meet
Well, I mean,
in person? I guess I should say.
interpersonal relationships are dynamic, though. I mean, like, to say that we never need to meet ever seems short-sighted.
Seems
I
harsh.
guess. Yeah. Seems
Like,
it
so I
doesn't
feel like
sound it doesn't sound ideal by any stretch.
I'm glad you said that, because this is the part I feel like that's missing from some of this conversation, which you and I have talked about a lot, but I don't
Yeah.
see in a lot of these articles, which is just, hey, why don't we meet sometimes just because human beings need to meet sometimes? Right. And I don't think that's a controversial statement,
No.
but it seems to be completely devoid of this discussion. It's like, because human beings need to see other human beings sometimes.
It feels like it feels like political alliances. People have rallied on two sides. Either we're always in the office, or like, screw you, I'm working from home. I do fine
Yeah.
here. And like, just each of
That
them cowered into their own little like barriers.
Yeah, not everything's a labor issue, you know? It's
Yeah.
like there's other things in life.
that's what has really bothered me about the remote work versus return to office conversation. Is that it's just kind of lacked a lot of nuance, and that's what I really liked about this Microsoft article, and what this team was
Yeah.
able to do is introduce that the it depends kind of question, right? Um, my economist brain would say, like, there's probably pros and cons of working in person versus working remotely, and um, we should have a conversation about, like, what are you trying to accomplish as an organization, as a team, and what's most important to you, and then if we can better understand, like, the pluses and minuses, then that kind of gets you a roadmap to understand what your strategy should be.
I don't know if this analogy will totally work, but you don't go to the grocery store every day, or you only go when you need something. And like the sort of same thing, people come into the office when they need something, and that could be like personal contact, or to improve onboarding, or to organize around developing an idea to launch it and get some traction.
Yeah. I think I lose touch sometimes because of this podcast, because we've talked about some of these topics so many times.
Yeah.
And then I'll go meet with people in the real world, and they're just now having these conversations for the first time. And it's like, oh my God, this feels like time travel. It's like, maybe I'm living in the future. I don't know.
You are from the future, man, and you don't see singularity, so that's probably a
I
good
don't
thing,
see
right?
them. Sorry.
For the return to office hardliners out there, the benefits of in-person collaboration have to be better than the ability to source talent anywhere in the world, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's a hard barrier to, like, jump over, or a hard bar to clear, in terms of just the benefits of access to talent. Not to mention saving on office space. So what I would like to see is more companies realizing that, and then setting aside some of that budget that they're not spending on office to get people to the grocery store, Scott, like, for what they need when
Yeah.
they need it.
Also, these blanket policies just feel like the antithesis of science or curiosity or research or seeking to understand your workforce in a better, more meaningful way. It feels like it's I don't want to say giving up, but it's essentially it's the laying the gauntlet down in a way that doesn't feel like it's beneficial to employees overall, or couldn't be in the future.
Yeah. Well, or like just to kind of build on that, Scott, it's like whether or not it's beneficial to like the productivity of employees seems to be not even part of the debate.
Yeah.
It's like, well, seems silly, right? The whole point of this is like to have productive employees, but now it's just about what I want or you want and who wins. And I was like, this seems silly.
You know what I want?
What?
Next article. Let's do
One
it.
more article.
One article.
Let's do it.
Okay, so this is a short little article by Paul Spector, and he essentially opines for a museum of industrial organizational psychology sort of items. Obviously, like, a lot of our stuff is cerebral. We don't have a physical objects in a lot of ways, but he mocks up some ideas on what may be included in this hypothetical museum. So he introduces a 1929 telephone to celebrate the Hawthorne studies, World War II era airplane. That's hard to say. Talk about benefiting human operators, World War I and World War II soldiers, traditional assembly line. This is an interesting point. The field of IO was initially called industrial psychology because most of the work was done in factories. And he talks about some well-being, a beating heart, this sort of thing. It starts getting like really abstract here, but kind of a fun little exercise to rejoice in our past accomplishments.
Yeah, like what should be in your metaphorical or literal museum of history of this field?
Yeah.
I don't know. Is there anything interesting you would include, Scott, that maybe he didn't include here?
Let's see. Some of the biggest things in the field of IO, I would say Army Alpha and Army Beta cognitive test. Like, it's not necessarily an object, but it is definitely massive sort of implications there. Perhaps bars scales, behaviorally anchored rating scales. Taylor Russell tables, if you want to get really fucking nerdy.
Looks like Jackson liked that one.
Absolutely. Yeah, or maybe there's utility analysis and it's just like in a graveyard. Because apparently that is just off limits at this point.
We don't need that.
Nobody uses that.
Was it SDY? Wasn't that a thing in utility analysis?
Okay. Yeah, SDXY. Shout out to Fred Oswald, who had a new article out about that, how it should be done.
Oh yeah, another blogosphere new adopter, Fred Oswald jumping in the game. But I don't know. I was thinking like, what about like Frederick Taylor's shovel from like the introduction of like Taylorism? You remember this?
No,
where they were like doing studies on people like using shovels and stuff like that. I don't know.
Yeah.
Anyway,
and the timer. Yeah.
Those like time and motion studies.
Yeah.
You ever seen these like time and motion studies? Gilbreth.
Yeah.
I think it'd be cool to have an exhibit that, maybe this is personality psych proper more than IO, but I always thought it was such a cool story how the Big Five was created. Through this process of like induction of like, let's identify all the words in the dictionary that could possibly describe somebody. And, just imagine like little words strung from the ceiling in a big like clusters and clumps. And you like see them kind of clumping together in like 5 big colored spheres. Could be a cool visual.
I think we would need a room of demotivational posters. I think that would be good. A little hang in there with a little cat hanging on.
Demotivational post. The Big Five, if you've ever seen like the sub scales that like filter down, it's not just like the Big Five, but then you got the subscales and even subscales. Really fascinating sort of visuals. I haven't seen one of those in a long time. And like to your point, the concept of G came about the same way, and split into fluid and crystallized intelligence, and then you got all these different sub factors associated with it as well. Using that psychometric approach to intelligence.
These are probably really underutilized constructs as well. Which reminds me of a question that I had for each of you. Cole, you'd written an article about here's what's overrated and underrated in people analytics, and I just wondered if you wrote that a couple years ago. Would you have changed your mind on any of those in the meantime, or maybe any others to add to that?
I'll be honest, I don't remember what I wrote. So
what are some overrated concepts, Cole?
what did I say? Anything you disagreed with that I should defend?
No, I think you were talking about how like attrition modeling, strategic workforce planning, that these are overrated, and then like operational workforce planning is underrated, O&A is underrated.
Oh yeah, I stand by those for sure. I mean, I still, every time I talk to a workforce planning person, I talk about why. I mean, I was even thinking like a person who wrote a prominent book on workforce planning. I talked to them a few months ago, and I was like, "You left out the chapter on operational workforce planning." They said, "Well, actually, a second version of this book is coming out. And we're adding that in." I was like, "Damn right it is," because like that's the stuff that actually matters. I do feel like O&A, although it does get a lot of love, I think a lot of the concrete, strong use cases are actually what's neglected. It kind of goes back to the AI point from earlier. It's like everybody got caught up in the novelty stuff with O&A, but it's the strong use cases where I feel like people are just missing the blocking and tackling stuff that I think it could be really helpful for. I mean, I don't know. Is there any, Scott, anything that you think is like overrated or underrated?
I think, well, it's the implementation of all these sort of things. So we talked about earlier around the use case of Gen AI. And there's not a whole lot of implementation. And there's a whole lot of analyses that are done, and it's organization specific, this sort of stuff. And like the real impact comes from its actual use, because like so much of what we do like as a field kind of just goes by the wayside as far as just like research for research purposes. With that said, if you're talking about implementation, I really like your idea of individual level attrition modeling. It sounds like a great idea. Like Jake is about to leave, and you're like, oh great, we know that Jake's about to leave, and then like all the weird shit starts happening. It's like, now we gotta have a sit down conversation with Jake. We gotta get with Jake's manager, and like Jake's manager is gonna like have a weird conversation with Jake. It's like, think about how this impacts employees and what it actually means, and are we that good to predict people from basic demographic information?
Well, and even if we are, to your point, what are we going to do about it, and what's the action?
Yeah. That's the implementation part right there.
Yeah. I don't know, Jackson, anything you think is overrated or underrated? Like anything that you got your eye on that you want to, put out there publicly?
One thing I think is probably underrated that I'd add to the list is program evaluation. Because we do a lot of stuff in HR, and not a lot of people are measuring like, is this even working? Is this even having its intended effect? And I think it can get a little bit political sometimes, because people start to think, oh, if my program's not found to be effective, will I lose my job? And,
who hates program evaluation? People who lead programs.
Yeah,
they hate it.
But they should love it, because even if it says, if we find that it's not working, we might be able to illuminate some actionable steps to say, here's like something we could do to like bridge the gap between like learning and behavior, for example.
It constantly amazes me like how much of, or how important those like first several months in a graduate program are for IO. And I'm talking about your research methods, your statistics, because like these things come up over and over.
Yep.
Like program measurement right there. A lot of times, if they collect any data at all, it's reaction data.
Right.
No real system set up to evaluate further down the line. Or just setting up simple sort of studies.
Yeah. It would be funny. This to me would be a funny experiment. Like sometimes you watch like a YouTube video or something, and they interview somebody on the side of the street, and they'd be like, what's the capital of the United States? And like 100 people can't answer the question because they're like, oh, nobody knows anything. It's like, what if you went up to like a room full of PhDs and you start asking the question, can you tell me the steps of the scientific method? And like, how many people would struggle with that?
I would love a Oh god, it would be a great man on the street, like at PSYOP. But it's like,
Yeah.
explain the results of a logistic regression to me, and watch
Yep.
him like,
Well, yeah. Please don't ask me. I remember we had Keith McNulty on here, and we had to get him to explain what odds ratios were. Like, I still can't do it effectively versus probabilities.
Things that you still Google every time you do them.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, are we done here?
I think we're about at time. Well, Jackson, it's been fun having you on. It was fun writing the article with you too. I think you have what I really appreciate about you is you have a really critical mind in this space, and I love that it's getting out there kind of for the first time. And so I'm glad you could come on the podcast. But Scott, any final words for Jake or Jackson before we wrap this thing up?
Jake or Jackson, it's great to see you again. You got a SoundCloud you want to promote?
Yeah, check out my new rap album on
Got a
SoundCloud.
mixtape.
Like, comment, subscribe. No, guys, I really appreciate you having me on. It's super fun. Good to see you both again. So.
Yeah. So pound that subscribe button, please.
Yeah, check out People Analytics blog or check out my LinkedIn.
Oh my gosh. Well, you've been listening to Directionally Correct, a People Analytics podcast with Colin Scott and Jackson Roach. Thanks, Jackson.
As always, all opinions are our own and do not reflect those of any other organization.
You've been listening to Directionally Correct, a People Analytics podcast with Colin Scott.